If you're ready to talk, we're willing to listen.
Well, I really enjoy this program today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
May God bless every person.
Afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us here on what is another wonderful Wednesday's edition of Talk Today, as we invite you to be a part of the discussion. As you tune in, as you log on, as Ms. Susan tells me, that always say to you guys, go to YouTube. You have some good looking guests. Well, today we have, at least one wonderful person in the studio. Miss Teresa Pitcairn and Samba Jackson joins us. So please stay tuned for Talk Today.
Radio Cayman's Talk Today, the Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program. We ask our listeners to avoid statements or comments which are abusive, derogatory, malicious, or defamatory. Do not use any indecent language or make any statement which is false or misleading. Email talktoday@candw.ky or call 1-800-534-8255. Courtesy of Flow,
Cayman's #1 network that connects you to your world like never before.
Let your voice be heard. Once again, here's your host, Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome, and thanks for joining us. And even though it is, I would even try to do my country song voice. It's Christmas and sing it, the song. I won't attempt that because I want you to be happy. I at least want you to be able to have ears that can hear and not have to go down to the audiologist, Dr. Stevenson, and the rest of them to check out the hearing after you hear me sing. So I won't do that today because I want to listen intently, become engaged and informed as we welcome some of the prominent legal minds in our community, Samba Jackson and Teresa Pitcairn. Thank you all very much for joining us, but equally thanks for being champions. Sometimes that voice crying in the wilderness seems to be lonely, but other times if it wasn't for that constant ringing, I think back to the days of the Ark. I was a young boy then, and glad I listened to my uncle. No, he was not. It has to be someone who is ringing the bell so that we can be reminded. Mr. Jackson, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good doing. Thanks for having us again.
Miss Teresa.
Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to come and spend some time with you, have a little chat with you, and also thanks so much to the listening audience.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I would, because I know the topic is very, very important, and hopefully people listening, it's not just important to one sort of profession or one sector, but it seems to me, at least my perception, that this is almost all-encompassing and touches and concerns almost every aspect potentially of the future employability, prosperity, success, upward mobility, all of the things that we try to sacrifice so that the future generations can have it better. It's not just about lawyers, no.
Indeed.
All right. Sammy, set the stage between you and Ms. Teresa. Help me to try to get a better understanding of everything.
Yeah, I just wanted to say as a precursor, because folks tend to think that this is about Sammy and I. It's not about Sammy and I. It's not about our views. These are views that were articulated beginning with the Law Reform Commission. I mean, from the late 90s to early 2000, lawyers were speaking to politicians about some of the concerns they had about upward mobility, about training, about discrimination. All of those things were pieced and put in a bucket and communicated with leadership, like I said, from the late 1990s to the early 2000s. The Law Reform Commission got involved at the request of the Honorable Attorney General, and I underscore, at the request of the AG, right? And this is nothing new. Our Premier knew about this from the time he was on our Bar Association Council. This is how far back this goes, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to put that out there, and I also want to underscore that the issues that the Law Reform Commission came up with are the same issues that befuddle and creates the challenges. People view it as toxic in this particular piece of legislation. So this is 20 years of addressing the same issues the Law Reform Commission highlighted. The same issues that the previous administration found toxic, which made it impossible for the bill to go through at the time, we're still laden with the same exact issues, right?
With reference to what you shared, it almost seems as if when we look at managed growth and development and the like, that we hear a few of our, much more informed that the heads talk about from the 70s, so to speak. The same issues that they were questioning and asking and arguing and trying to put forward. 50 years later, we're still doing it. This seems to be the same thing. We're just kicking the can down the road and not getting to that point. If I could then ask, from just, again, I want to say almost a casual, almost uninformed perspective, for a non-legally connected entity like myself, it would seem that there are some fundamental things: the economic loss to the country, the potential reputational risk, and then the prospect that the future employment of Caymanians or even others in the industry could be affected. Now, that's without reading it, understanding it, knowing anything else. Those three things seem to jump out and slap you in the face immediately.
And Dwayne, can I also say, this is not necessarily a Caymanian issue. And I want to underscore that this actually affects all of us who call these little islands their home.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, share with us, because I think that's where we need, and I want to say those 3 points from what I garnered from media reports over the last, 2 decades or so, from conversations just casually with even some of the sitting politicians in the past ones. You said, lawyers talk to politicians, but some of those politicians themselves were practicing lawyers at some point in the House at that time.
Indeed, the Premier himself, as Teresa mentioned, was one of the champions of this cause. We had many discussions when we were all part of Teresa, myself, and him. He was the president of the Caymanian Bar Association back in the day when that organization actually functioned the way it was intended to, by its founders, who we owe great debt of gratitude to. And it was sad to see that it was during his reign that organization was actually disbanded. This idea that has been promoted, that it was merged with the Cayman Islands Law Society, when I don't even know how you can merge two differently constituted entities. And then out of that, there was this by some process of metamorphosis they suggest was born SILPA, when that is not actually the truth. SILPA is a private company. We've talked about this before, and all the shortcomings with that, with regards to the conflicts of interest, etc. But it's sad to see that here we are, right before Christmas, once again debating important legislation. I had someone sent me a screenshot of a Facebook page this morning where one of my and Teresa's colleagues in this fight, Sherry Bowden-Cohen, was commenting this morning, not again, this thing raises its ugly head every 4 years. And that succinctly describes how I feel about it too. Because, it is tiring, and perhaps that is the intent, that they wear us down to the point where we cave in. Because, as I said on the show before recently, this is more the same thing, but a different label on it. And I say that because after the last time we were here, we hadn't yet had the chance to really put this thing under the microscope. But we've done that since. And we have done that to the extent that we have identified several fundamental, specific provisions that need to be addressed by amendment, a number of them by deletion. And we have identified those by creating a markup of the bill, a word-formatted bill, which we had to convert ourselves because, of course, we don't have the luxury of a legislative draftsperson to assist us with that. And after many, many hours of meetings and discussions about how the bill offended in numerous ways the fundamental positions that ALPA had advanced to government last year, right? And I have that document, I'll share that with you, where we had outlined the basic fundamental provisions that we think, as Caymanian attorneys, as citizens of Cayman, as responsible lawyers, the government needs to provide for in any new legislation. That it is clear to us that has been ignored. And once again, our concerns have been cast aside for inexplicable reasons, despite promises during a face-to-face meeting with the AG, the Premier and Minister Hugh, that we would be meeting with SILPA to discuss the advent of a new piece of legislation. What instead happened, because at that point SILPA was floating around its own version of the bill that they had prepared. We were subsequently contacted by the Attorney General. I was told that there's a new bill which had been prepared by his legislative draft persons, and that he thought I would be pleased with it because it was done by them, and that he indicated that SILPA might not be happy with it, but my response to that was, it matters not to me whether SILPA is upset, right? Mm-hmm. What matters to me is whether it's balanced legislation. And I indicated to him then very clearly that if indeed this new draft legislation enshrined all of the fundamental provisions, and I went through and listed some of them, including a properly structured regulatory body designed in accordance with the blueprint set out in the recently promulgated, by recent I mean 2019 it took effect. It was drafted, passed through Parliament in 2017, the Public Authorities Law. And I said to him, if you have a statutory regulator that is independent of the firms, all the firms, independent of the profession at large, and functions as a proper statutory regulator should, with all of the usual bells and whistles, including provisions for conflicts of interest, with meaningful provisions to deal with that. Mm-hmm. Then, if you can achieve all of that in your new draft, or if you have achieved all of that in your new draft, that is something that I could certainly support. Because at the end of the day, and we keep repeating this, because the government's spokespersons have been making much noise about how we have always blockaded the bill. We didn't block any bill. We don't have the capability, certainly I don't, of blocking any bill. I raised concerns about it. Teresa raised concerns about it. Lots of people raised concerns about it. And the Premier, certainly in regards to the last bill, was who pulled that one. So we didn't block anything. He pulled it.
And he even said it's not a good idea to deal with it now because there's so little time for this.
But yet we get it shoved on our throat before Christmas.
This important piece of legislation.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned those two things, because as we go to the break, maybe our listeners, but equally we can mull it over. I've had a number of calls from individuals. I didn't see Ms. Sherry Borden-Cowan's comments earlier. This may or may not have sparked the comments. I don't know. I'm not. But from people who identify themselves, people who didn't have to because their voices were recognizable. But one person said this is not unlike, the creature from Jekyll Island, where when a parliamentary body meets near a holiday, a Christmas, to bring legislation where most people, their minds and guards are down, and yet you get it through, get it passed. And I can't repeat what the individual said the way he phrased it, but an inference would be that it wasn't very.
all indications are that is indeed the type of creature we're dealing with. The creature from Jekyll Island is the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor reserve.
Right.
Was created on Jekyll Island sometime in around 1910, I think, by way of a meeting of a number of specially interested, very, very wealthy individuals, including the Aldriches, Rockefellers, etc. They had a secret meeting, decided on a legislative platform and a way to get it passed, and right before World War I they passed it, and that's the Federal Reserve Act, with all of its shortcomings. And I make it is a good analogy, because I said yesterday on a different show that this draft legislation, despite the assurances of the Attorney General, still has the fingerprints of SILP on it. I don't know if there are trace fingerprints left over from borrowing provisions from their previous draft, or whether there's some direct or indirect influence being brought to bear here. But I do know this, that when SILPA calls a meeting, SILPA has the capacity somehow to call a meeting in the back rooms of the LA building with the Premier and Attorney General. That happened recently.
All right.
It's mind-blowing stuff.
Interesting. Let's pause and take a short break. When we come back, we invite you to be a part of the discussion. We know it's Christmas-ish, almost.
Doesn't feel like it.
And, well, things that matter to us for future prosperity, stability are still important. So stay tuned for Talk Today.
Get ready for Cayman National Dance Company's Retrospective, December 19th at the Harquail Theatre. Retrospective is a versatile journey of the company's signature dances and new creations. Tickets are $25 for adults and $15 for children. Available at Audiophile, Bang & Olufsen, Radiance Dance Studio, or simply call 926-1826. Retrospective is sponsored by Burger King, CUC, ARC Directors, Vi's Closet, Big Fish, Radio Cayman, and Hurley's Media.
Thinking of getting a hybrid but don't know much about them? Vamped Motors has lots of great reasons why you should choose the new Toyota CHR Hybrid for a new ride. Hybrids save fuel, run cleaner, reduce CO2 emissions, and even recharge their batteries while being driven, so you don't ever have to worry about plugging them in. Plus, the CHR Hybrid is reliable, providing up to 1 million kilometers on the same battery and engine. And its sporty subcompact SUV look makes it fun as well as economical to drive. So stop by Vamped Motors to treat yourself this Christmas to a new fuel-efficient, eco-friendly Toyota CHR, starting from $31,900 while stock lasts. Happy holidays from all of us at Vamped Motors on Walkers Road.
UCCI students, have you registered for classes in the spring 2021 semester? Class registration takes place until January 8th. Classes start January 11th. Spring into action. Visit ucci.edu.ky/myucci. Call 623-8224 or email admissions@ucci.edu.ky for more information.
The Tuesday and Thursday edition of The Business Buzz is brought to you by Cayman Medical Supplies, providing quality pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, and consumer products to healthcare providers, retailers, and ultimately the patients at a reasonable rate in a friendly, caring, and timely manner. Cayman Medical Supplies is located at number 93 Smith Road, Windward Center. Telephone 949-6211.
The road to becoming a British Overseas Territories citizen just became a lot smoother. You can now apply online at online.odg.gov.ky. If you or someone you know needs to be naturalized or registered as a British Overseas Territories citizen, or if you are a citizen and need to replace your lost or damaged certificate, complete the process at online.odg.gov.ky.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. And in the studio is Teresa Pickard and Saba Jackson, two of our permanent attorneys, not just gifted legal minds, but if you would mind me saying, I know Miss Teresa shared earlier, it's not about us, but sometimes, sadly, our people need to be able to seek other courageous stalwarts in our community so they themselves can find it within them, that metal that we once presented and projected and possessed, so that, it gives us a sense of confidence and conviction and a culture where we don't take things laying down easily, So thank you all.
And it's good that you raised that because, I think that some of the times people believe that it's simply easy to get up here and put your neck out and actually expose your family to a lot of craziness. Just this morning when my husband, I was just saying to Sammy, when John was leaving the house this morning to go to work, he saw me up reviewing some stuff, and he says, "Is this legal practitioner's bill again?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, he I won't say exactly what he said, but in a nutshell, it affects your family.
Yeah.
It affects the children, and I didn't get up one day and say that, you know, I'm going to deal with this and I'm going to
make it right.
Yeah.
No.
But at some point, and I have to say, I'm so grateful for the mother that I had, because I lived and observed a fabulous woman who simply did not allow others to define her, did not allow others to tell her what she is worth. Because my mom is not like, quote unquote, brown came out. My mom is really black. And with all the connotations that comes with a colonial mindset.
In that era.
And, and today. And my mom wasn't afraid of wearing her hair naturally, right? So I didn't get up one morning and decide I was just going to wholesale destroy my career, because that's what happened as a result of standing up with a willingness to call people out and say, this is just plain wrong and you can't do this. And to discover that they can. And when our leadership know that they do it and are complicit in allowing this to continue. This is why this time around I'm calling it out. And I'm saying our Attorney General knows about this. Mm-hmm. You can't now say that you're going to develop a piece of legislation which you know is toxic. And our premier, and they're both lawyers. They're also persons who were officers of the court, to the extent you were saying the other day that our premier is not a practicing lawyer.
He says he's retired.
Yeah, they understand the meaning of what it says when you're an officer of the court. So the standards that you and I are required to behave with is less than what they're required to. So this is how serious this is. And this is why I'm calling it out at this time.
Well, you know, as you said, you know, those of us who stand up and be counted, stand in the gap, sometimes it affects us and our families. I mean, you know, I used to be 7 feet tall. You know, you chip away at you at some point and see how tall I am now. So
you're funny.
one days ending the way. But in all seriousness, this is why I think I commend you and the other members in the community, and in this case those who've, you know, assembled their legal minds, because this isn't just about the legal profession in and of itself. As I understand it, this isn't just about a group against another group, or even if we could dismiss the potential reputational risk, could we be willing to overlook the financial loss to the country's treasury when seemingly the numbers that I remember Miss Sherry years ago as a guest saying, if you did the math over these years, potentially this is the tens of millions that we may not have collected. That's scholarships, man. That's housing. That's something.
Exactly.
That's paying for people who live in their cars, because this is our reality today. I was just, you know,
and it's getting worse.
Oh, progressively, and the way and this is why I tend to get so heated to some degree about this, because this could have been me. This could have been my story. So we you know, to add insult to injury, we have the ability to create a more level playing field for all of us.
Right. Help me to understand. I mean, I share with you, like I try to do with every discussion, inform myself to some extent. I don't say that I understand and know everything by any means, right? I like to ask questions, and sometimes that offends people because A, they don't want to answer, B, they don't think I deserve an answer, C, they don't really know, but they try to BS their way through it. But this seems to be crucially significant to Cayman and to the future practice of law in Cayman by all and sundry. But how do I put it this way? Most of us seem to dismiss things that don't directly affect us then and there. It could happen, they might acknowledge it might happen, but you know, if they don't feel it then, they don't bother with it. So help us to understand the significance of this. I would very respectfully say that most of us would appreciate that timing is important. So if you bring a legislation at Christmas that is absolutely important, if people are not paying attention, some would question, well, why is that? Others would say, well, it's expedient.
Well, this government has developed a pattern of doing that. Not just this, but its predecessor. important bills like the National Conservation Law, for example, was brought in early November or late November and debated in December, passed in December. This is, to me, a tactic on the part of the government, a shameful one. They gave us the bare minimum of time for consultation. And I heard just yesterday from one of the government backbench members, Austin Harris, who I met with in my office. He was brought there by a constituent of his who was a member of ALPA. We had a meeting to discuss this bill specifically. He told me he had just come from a meeting with the Attorney General, and I presume the rest of the cabinet at least, and that they were wondering why ALPA hadn't put in any commentary on the bill, as if somehow we were now blocked from an opportunity to opine on any of the provisions. And I said, well, that's because we had the minimum amount of time. Bear in mind that ALPA is comprised of small Caymanian practitioners, or by small practices. ALPA's members only come from firms that are 5 lawyers or less, right? We're all Caymanian, and each one of us, as I explained to him, have to be at work billing in order to make money. We don't have, a whole slew of minion working for us, worker bees working for us to generate income. And we all are challenged. We have businesses, families here, etc., that we need to attend to. But we did, in fact, and I informed him this, we did, in fact, meet a number of times, well into the night. We looked at this thing with a microscope. We've gone through it thoroughly now. And yes, it was a week after the consultation period that we produced a marked up version of the bill and a number of very pointed comments on its shortcomings. And by then we had ascertained that given that when I say we, I mean ALPA, had provided our position in regards to the fundamental provisions that we wanted. When we saw that those were ignored completely, we knew that once again, the government had not taken our concerns on board, did not appear to be honest brokers in this. They didn't come back to us, ask us what we meant by anything. They didn't give us any reason why they rejected our views. They didn't give us an opportunity to meet that which was promised us, either with them or SILPA. And we realized, and I want to say this clearly, one of the things that we had to discuss painfully yesterday was, this is with Austin, why is it that you choose to work with the opposition? My response to that is simple. Because the folks in the opposition, despite their smaller number, are people who have an established historical position with regards to the fundamental provisions that we want. They were the same ones that were on our side before, right? We didn't choose them. We'd prefer if government would listen to us, because then we know it would be easy to get the relevant provisions passed so that the legislation is balanced the way it should be. But the simple fact is, we don't trust the government. I certainly can tell you I don't. Having experienced all that I've experienced since August of 2019 with regards to what SILPA has done to us, me in particular, and a number of other Caymanian lawyers in ALPA, because we dared to question the legitimacy of what government facilitated with regards to SILPA and the creation of CARA. And despite complaint, which we put pen to paper, and we wrote a very pointed letter saying all of the things that we thought we needed to be said about the illegitimacy of that enterprise, which has to date not been responded to by the Attorney General, despite promises from October of last year. We know that we're not dealing with honest brokers on the government side of the table. Certainly, I could say that. And that truly bothers me, Dwayne, because You know, both, I said this yesterday as well, both the Attorney General and the Premier are former friends of mine. I've worked with them. I've supported them on many, many causes. And it isn't easy for me to say this publicly, but I am very, very disappointed that we have not had an opportunity, right? And we don't have yet any explanation as to why the fundamental provisions which we see from a Cayman perspective needs to be implemented. Why is it we are going down the road of doing the same exact thing that we were trying to do, or others were trying to do before?
Can I interject quietly? Not when Sammy say we as ALPA, let us underscore that the Law Reform Commission from 2005 are in agreement. So this is not just us suddenly coming up with this. This is one of the reasons why the bill didn't go through successfully in 2017 and why it continues to be bothersome today.
All right.
And simply put, right, unless there is, and I said this to Austin as well, show me the empirical data that the government has to prove that these practices, these illicit practices that government has turned a blind eye to and now wishes to effectively license, the same way that the previous bills did. Show me where the economic benefit derived from the practices of the firms in that regard outweighs or outstrips the damage done to the public's interest.
Okay.
How can you say that? And where's the study? And that was where we started, you know. You'll remember that when we were here last time, we said, we cannot believe the government would recklessly barge ahead with legislation which reinvents the wheel in terms of not only the structure of the council, the regulatory authority, the very nature of it being a board, which we have yet to have explained to us how that works, what that is. But for us to simply rubber stamp folks who have been holding themselves out, that most egregious offence for which lawyers can be disbarred. Lawyers are...
And this is not today, these are partners too. So, you see, when the bar is set at that level, and I always bring it down to the man on the street. My son, a 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old, our sons, our daughters that are sent to Northward, you know, for crimes that weigh far less against this community. And we see what officers of the court, senior officers of the court, what they do. They know what they're doing is wrong. They know that it's a breach of the law. They know that it's a breach of the penal code. And now our government is asking us, the taxpayers who pay their salary, to pass legislation that makes it difficult for us in this community. No, someone like, and this is not today. We asked the question about providing us with the evidence. No one has.
All right, we do have a short break to take now. Let's continue, and this is perhaps the significance of this discussion amongst all the other salient points. But when we return, please rejoin us.
Christmas may be a little different this year, but it will taste as jolly good as ever with KFC. Whether it's an office party, holiday fete, or family gathering, enjoy KFC's delicious, fresh, hand-breaded chicken. The KFC Festive Feast includes 10 pieces of original recipe or spicy chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, tasty coleslaw, biscuits, and a 2-liter Pepsi. KFC's holiday catering menu includes buckets of hot wings, sweet chili wings, or chicken tenders. KFC, it's good.
The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan. We're here for you. We are a not-for-profit, member-centric plan with a democratically elected volunteer board of trustees representing all sectors of the Cayman Islands economy. We have an all-in expense ratio of less than 1%, over 20,000 members, and $490 million in assets under management. We were the first multi-employer pension plan approved by the regulator in the late 1990s, and today we are still strong, secure, and are here for our employees and employers employers alike. If you would like to join or require further information, visit chamberpension.ky. And for information as it happens, follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. Email admin@pensions.ky or call 745-7630. The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan. We're here for you.
I've got some beautiful clothes. I know just where they go. Puritan Cleaners.
By popular demand to serve our valued customers, Puritan Cleaners has revised its schedule for all 3 locations effective immediately. Monday to Saturdays, Eastern Avenue from 7:30 a.m. until 5:30 p.m. Elgin Avenue from 8 a.m. until 5:30 p.m. Savannah Countryside 10 a.m. until 5:30 p.m. Your orders may be transferred to any other Puritan store to suit your working and shopping needs. Let us help you to be ready for those special events coming up. Call 949-7104. Puritan Cleaners, you feel good when you look good.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome back. Thanks for joining us. And in the studio, Sammy Jackson and Teresa Pitcairn. Now, as we talk about, I still call it the Legal Practitioners Bill, but now I think it's now the Legal Services Bill. It's before the House and on the discussion. Sammy, between you and Teresa, thanks for giving us some insight, some level of edification. Please, if you will, continue so that we can understand more.
Well, I mean, if we could sort of drill down to some extent into the details of the bill without boring people to tears, because I know how tedious that can seem, and trust me, it's no easier for lawyers. We just get used to it. But there's basically 3 major initiatives, 3 major areas that need to be addressed in this new legislation. And that is how overseas practitioners or attorneys at law, we're going to call them, which is what they are licensed to operate overseas. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the other thing is the lack of regulation of law firms themselves as a going concern. All law firms are required to do under this legislation, this proposed legislation, is to pay a fee and sign a compliance certificate saying they comply with the law, which the only thing the law requires them to comply with is payment of the fee. So it's a pretty easy certificate to sign. And thirdly, and not unimportantly, the structure of the regulatory authority, which we say should be a proper authority in accordance with not only the established practice or the established legislative framework of many, many, many statutory authorities, but with what is now required by the provisions of the Public Authorities Law. And that is so that public authority can function as is required and dictated by the Public Management and Finance Law. So that from a financing standpoint, it's an independent body. It's funded by government. It has certain outputs, etc. And it signs an arm's length agreement. And that way you eliminate political interference. Right, but it has to be, its board has to be populated by competent, qualified, but relevantly experienced individuals who have no conflicts of interest. And where they have conflicts of interest, they must declare them, and then the board can co-opt somebody to fill that gap in terms of experience or qualifications it may need. But it functions as an independent authority so that no one can say, right, successfully, that there's external influence. That is how authorities must function. That is what good governance requires. And the process must be transparent. And obviously, when you have that type of structure, that entity can then regulate free of any external influence and do what it needs to do as it is required and permitted by the law to do, and then the regulations passed under that law. What we have instead is a board, which is a nebulous thing. It's a strange structure because board, when you use that term in any statute, in any law, I'm still going to call it laws, although I'm told we're supposed to call it acts from now on. When that term is used, it normally refers to a board of directors of a statutory authority. So that's the sort of the policymakers. You know, companies have the same thing. Companies have shareholders, and they have a board of directors. It's pretty much the same structure. So a functioning authority has board members who make all the high-level decisions, and then they instruct staff members to carry out those things, right? So you have a secretariat or a functioning body, and I've worked in them. I've been on the board of ER, the Electricity Regulatory Authority, the ICTA, the Health Services Authority, so I know how those things function. And I cannot for the life of me figure out how this board, this strange creature could function, even if we didn't have glaring constitutional conflicts of interest, constitutionally embedded conflicts of interest. I say that because if you're going to it proposes to put as ex officio members the Chief Justice and the Attorney General as founding members. And I have to tell you, at first blush, I thought, well, that's a great thing, you know, not only because those folks are respected gentlemen, generally speaking.
And it's really the office, though.
It's the office, high office in terms of the hierarchy, the constitutional hierarchy, and they have certain constitutional responsibilities. But then when we started to examine it as lawyers should, we realized, hang on, what happens if this board has to be judicially reviewed or constitutionally challenged by way of a petition or writ under Section 26(1) of the Constitution? And then we realized, how is that going to be possible? How are you going to bring in? Both of those things need to be brought to the Grand Court. And the Chief Justice is the Chief Judicial Officer of the Grand Court.
That's right.
Creates an automatic conflict. And the Attorney General, the Attorney General is effectively amicus curiae in relation to, he protects the interests of the public in relation to any of those actions. He can intervene, etc. Yeah. So he shouldn't be on it either. So because you're tying the hands of the board, or you're depriving potentially the public of opportunity to judicially challenge this board, and that cannot actually work because the Constitution is actually supreme, right? So certainly from a constitutional petition standpoint, you imagine the nightmare we'd have as a jurisdiction if this board, which has the Chief Justice and Attorney General sitting on it, was constitutionally challenged. That challenge has to go to the Grand Court. The Chief Justice is, as I said, the Chief Judge. So how do you deal with that without the appearance of bias? Remember, the rule against bias isn't about whether there's actual bias. It's about whether there is the appearance of bias, right? And when we realize this can't work, and in any event, we then ask the next logical question: why is the government trying to reinvent the wheel? They just passed, they postponed it several times, the Public Authorities Law. But that took effect in June of 2019, and that is supposed to prescribe the structure of all of the statutory authorities and transform them into public authorities, and it prescribes how those how board members are appointed, and conflicts of interest, and all those good things that we want to see in terms of good governance. So we then said, why did we not follow that? Why did the government not follow that blueprint, right? We've not been able to answer that. But we are concerned that if those concerns fall on deaf ears, that we will end up with an aberration of a regulatory authority that will not be able to effectively regulate. But worse yet, there's four words that need to be removed from the operative provisions that empowers that board, and that is words that permit the board to then delegate its functions to anyone else it chooses. And we said, hang on, that's not on. That means they could literally hand the reins over to SILPA and or CARA, right? And we already have issues with them, and the government knows we have issues. We have lawsuits pending, right? Which is still not answered, still not determined. And we gather the government is bringing a motion to indemnify CARA. So we have serious concerns about that, and those words need to be stricken simply because it is just wrong to create a statutory appointment process for a board of a statutory authority. So even if they agree that it should be an authority, that authority should not be allowed to abdicate or delegate its function to anyone it chooses.
Right.
They hand over the reins. That's what abdication means, because then there's no legitimate process, no transparent process, no legal process where these folks are appointed. You could end up appointing anyone who's not even fit and proper.
So if I may just ask then, we'll take a quick sort of break, hit the news, come back, and then we can continue. All right, please turn us off to the break.
Today's biggest news.
Radio K-Man.
It's only 2 species that we have, on Iowa.
Generations present.
Your voice, your choice.
It is in the best interest of the people of these islands.
Local, regional, international. This is Headlines from Radio K-Man's newsroom.
Today's biggest news.
With your latest headlines, I'm Felicia Rankin-Solins. The offices of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, Administration and the Treasury Department will close at 12 noon on Friday, December 11th, 2020 for a staff function. The offices will reopen for business on Monday, December 14th, 2020 for regular business hours. In international news, people with a history of significant allergic reactions should not have the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID jab, regulators say. It came after 2 NHS workers had allergic reactions on Tuesday. The advice applies to those who have had reactions to medicines, food, or vaccines, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency said. Brazil's Gol has become the first airline to resume commercial flights with the Boeing 737 MAX. The plane had been grounded worldwide since March 2019, following 2 deadly crashes which killed 346 people. So far, only the U.S. and Brazil have recertified the jet. The U.S. Army has fired or suspended 14 commanders and lower-level leaders at the Fort Hood base in Texas over a pattern of violence there, including murder, sexual assaults, and harassment. An investigation into problems at the base was launched following the killing of soldier Vanessa Guillen this year. These are your headlines. I'm Felicia Rankin-Solins.
For the latest in news and information,
follow Radio K-Man on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Download the Radio K-Man app or log on to our website, radiokman.gov.ky.
Your voice, your choice, your radio.
This season, Vigoro is stocking something for everyone in our 2 garden centers. Christmas decorations, succulents, ceramics, blooms, orchids, garden sculptures and accessories, mobiles and garden furniture, water fountains and wall art, and even fairies for the little ones. Make it a Vigoro Christmas with a gift that will be treasured forever. Both garden centers will be open on Christmas Eve till 6 p.m. Merry Christmas from Vigoro.
Honey, our fridge has stopped working again. Everything in the freezer is melting. We need to get this repaired right away. I'm calling Brand Source Service.
When you need the very best appliance service, call Brand Source Service at 623-5000. Offering service and installation of all brands and models of appliances. Brand Source Service is Cayman's source for appliance parts and repairs with qualified and experienced technicians and the island's largest stock of appliance parts. Brand Source Service will have your repair completed in a flash. So, whatever the problem is, call the experts at 623-5000. Brand Source Service, Dorsey Drive, Industrial Park. Telephone 623-5000.
King Sports Center takes pride in being more than just an ordinary gymnasium. For 14 years, their multi-purpose facility has been providing the community with a variety of sporting, recreational, and relaxation activities. King Sports Center has a bowling alley, lounge bar, multi-purpose rooms, powerhouse gym, rock climbing wall, bungee jumping, a 10,000 square foot rink, and so much more. For more information on the variety of services, call their friendly staff today at 946-5464 or email kings@candw.ky or visit www.kingsportscenter.com. King Sports Center, your one-stop shop for fitness, recreation, and relaxation.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Good afternoon and welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Ms. Teresa Pickard and Mr. Sammy Jackson for joining us. But we do have an opportunity for some of our callers. We did have a caller on prior to the news break, and respectfully, I recognize that we wanted to get a chance to hear a little more to get informed. So to that caller, to others, phone lines are there if you want to call back. We do respect your time. We do ask you that accept our apology. Sometimes we have you waiting a bit longer, but 949-8037 or 1-800-534-8255. The legal services bill. I don't mean it to be, how do you say, seem almost insignificant, but to name it the legal services bill when we're talking about it, is that of any particular consequence?
Semantic.
Just semantic. Okay, all right.
That's my opinion.
Right.
It is intended to bring about the same initiatives or give birth to the same initiatives that the predecessor bills labeled legal practitioners law.
Yeah, I mean I can understand word fatigue, but legal practitioners, okay, that may sound like lawyers, legal services. Then are we providing other stuff? So I was just wondering if there was more to it, if it was just semantics as you shared.
Well, it may well be. I mean, some of these law firms now perform a multitude of services. And I suppose careful thought needs to be given to that as well. Whether how does that impact? If there's overlap? One of the things that I have been always concerned about is when you have a firm in Cayman, right, who's part of a global conglomerate, whether they can engage in anti-competitive practices, right, like underpricing. They could come here and you could have a large Chinese firm, just say, that has 1,000 lawyers in it all over the globe, mostly in China. They could probably churn out legal work in Cayman for a fraction of the cost and take a loss here and literally put everybody else out of business. Why is it that no one is concerned about that?
That's what I was looking at.
We're so engaged in doing the reverse, right? Because that's what we're doing here as Cayman. But what happens when the tables are turned on us as a jurisdiction? Right? Because I'm advocating what has been done. So I covered briefly the concerns about the structure of the board, which is one of the three things. The other thing was, and this ties right into what you just asked, the lack of regulation of law firms. By lack of regulation, I mean this bill doesn't propose to have law firms licensed by any sort of process, clear, transparent, process that promotes accountability and responsibility on the part of the law firm, which is shocking. All you have to do is pay a fee. There's no fine, sorry, that's definitely me misspeaking, and that is one of the things that needs to happen. Here's why. A law firm as a going concern, as you just rightly queried, can perform a multitude and does perform a multitude of other collateral services other than pure legal services. Legal services itself is a very difficult thing to define. And we have seen in this legislation, one of the concerns we have is there's no real concise definition of what is legal, performing a legal service, and there's a multitude of exemptions, right? When you taken in total, whittled down just about the field of what constitutes legal practice to very little. That's another concern. That's something that would have to be addressed, I believe, going forward. I think there needs to be some study, some form of objective exercise whereby government evaluates what it wants lawyers to do, what it wants only lawyers to be able to do. That is something that has plagued us for a long time, because we have folks who are not lawyers doing things that they shouldn't really be doing. you know, and you don't allow that in other industries. You don't allow a non-electrician to do electrical work. You don't allow a non-doctor to do surgery. We have to have proper control. It makes a mockery of the whole thing. But before we get there, and this is one of the fundamental things that ALPA put forward, is we need to have Caymanian ownership and control, first and foremost, of the law firms here. We need to get there. I'm not saying that needs to happen overnight, and we kick off all of those firms who don't meet the threshold. But certainly, given if we are going to license persons to practice Cayman law overseas, if we are going to have a regulator keep having oversight over what they do, that they need to be that is going to present logistical challenges, right? You're going to some extent have to rely in good faith, or on the good faith of the law firm itself, that they won't cause, and in particular, jurisdictional or reputational damage to the Cayman Islands. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that was flagged by the proposers of the last bill, or the proposer of the last bill, Mr. Panton himself, jurisdictional risk. And there is jurisdictional risk because those folks overseas are doing work that is related to what some tax jurisdictions call tax avoidance, and that always raises a red flag. So we need to be absolutely careful that we put the regulator in a position where it doesn't have an insurmountable task to regulate. One way to do that easily is to be able to hold the firm and its principals accountable. And there's every good reason to believe that if the firm is, and by firm I mean even legal companies, I'll come to explain why I say that, the firm must be held accountable. And if it's Caymanian owned and controlled, there's every good reason to believe that they will be more responsible in terms of how they behave, and they would have a sufficient nexus to the country that in the event of something going awry overseas, they wouldn't pull up sticks and go home, as we say, right? And in any event, that is what we require of all other industries, right? Subject to exemptions in exceptional circumstances. Right. So for the firms that couldn't comply, we would propose that they be given some type of LCCL, that is a local company control law license, and that would have certain conditions that dictates a glide path towards ultimate Caymanian ownership and control. Not full ownership, obviously. We don't want to run away foreign investors, but we want to be able to be assured that the firms are acting in the best interest of Cayman. That's the position taken many years ago with the advent of the trade and business license law for all other industries that are licensed under that law. That's the first thing. But because that doesn't by itself achieve the objective of ensuring that the law firms behave, we want to make sure that folks who own the law firms, whether they're Caymanian or not, are fit and proper persons to be running a law firm, owning and running a law firm. Because we know that, especially in this era of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing and all of that sort of stuff, that we have a global responsibility and a global image that we need to protect. And we know the consequences of not protecting that. And we don't need one renegade law firm or its affiliate overseas doing something that ends up being a debacle that destroys the reputation of this country. It is in Cayman's absolute best interest. And in fact, I think government is duty bound to do everything it can to make sure that we finally rein these firms in. They have been committing criminal offences under the legal practitioner's law, though it's only punishable by a $200 fine. And
I was going to remind you that, remember, they have the Garlick opinion that was issued in 2017, right. And this was a prominent QC, evaluated the legal practitioner's law, had a look at the penal code and the common law cases that related to it, and he came down strongly on the side that people that are practicing abroad that don't have the practicing certificate is committing a criminal offense under the penal code. And again, I'm going to drill down into this, into the weeds. Our Premier knows. The Attorney General knows. In fact, I remember I found the Attorney General's comment in the Legislative Assembly for the 15th of March 2017, and when the opinion was given, when it was raised, and he says, but Madam Speaker, I am not the final arbiter of whether criminal offences are committed or not. I am just giving my opinion on the issue. So I have to this is serious, and we got to hold folks accountable. It's the taxpayers' money that's going into this over and over, and you saw where they were going to pay.
But he's the chief legal officer in our justice system. His
Cabinet agreed to pay SILPA over $2 million for the years of 2020, 2021 for SILPA to monitor and supervise the members with practicing certificates. Only members with practicing certificates. Not all of those folks that is practicing Cayman law outside of the jurisdiction. Our taxpayers' money.
Do we know whether that $2 million or any part thereof was ever dispersed to SILPA for this?
Well, there was supposed to be 2 tranches paid annually. One was 1.1 million, and then the subsequent year would be 1.2, I think it was.
Right.
There is a purchase agreement signed between the Attorney General and SILPA. Subsequent to SILPA's appointment as supervisory authority under the Proceeds of Crime Law for anti-money laundering. They've since been busy expanding their remit to include other things, and they've created this wonderful concept called CARA, the Cayman Attorneys Regulation Authority. Which pretends to be legitimate. And it was that challenge, it was that which we challenged, which resulted in us being targeted and fines issued against us right before lockdown. One of the things I had to do in lockdown was prepare a lawsuit, an application for leave to file an appeal under the anti-money laundering regulations, and a massive affidavit that detailed all the reasons, included all of the letters from ALPA, which the government hasn't, and I suspect can't respond to, and that case has yet to be answered or tried. Right. So I don't wish to speak too much to that. And then subsequent to that, we filed a constitutional petition, and others filed a constitutional petition themselves against challenging the constitutionality and the legitimacy of what SILPA and CARA have done. Meanwhile, government continues to pay public funds to a private entity to do something on the pretense that it is a public authority.
Right. And I appreciate it because, as you were sharing, Mr. Reese, the notion that this is
that's why we don't trust the government.
Taxpayers' money. There's some of us because we're cheap, some of us because we're economically conscious, some of us because we're prudent, some of us because we're looking for accountability and responsibility, to those who are in position. If this is $1 million or $2 million or however, it could be a cent. There needs to be accountability. So that's what's the question. Is that money, being paid over still? And if so, what if in the end it turns out that it was improperly, Well,
Louine, if I showed you the purchase agreement, you'd fall over backwards. It's exactly 2 pages long, right? It has no detailed provisions for exactly the outputs. And again, remember, I was chair of the ICTA, so I know what a purchase agreement's supposed to look like, right? I just had to shake my head. All they have to do is to produce a report saying they did a certain number of investigations, and in exchange for that, they get $1 million plus. And you know who they came after? As predicted by us, we said to the Premier, we being ALPA, that we are concerned about us being targeted because we had already written this letter, right? We said, we are concerned that we will be the low-hanging fruit and we will be scapegoated so that CARA can produce a report to the OECD or the CFATF saying, look, we've had this number of prosecutions. And we were saying, oh, no. The Attorney General said in response to one of my colleagues, "Oh, don't say that. You can't say that. This is not a banana republic, and we don't prosecute innocent people." And I said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Attorney General, but I think there's a number of acquitted defendants in this country that would beg to differ with that."
All right. We do have a caller online. To those who are joining us,
Sure.
Teresa Pitcairn, Sammy Jackson are our guests. The legal services bill, which is now before the House. Let's go to the phones. Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for calling.
Good afternoon, Dwayne. Good afternoon, Miss Teresa and Sammy.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Fine, thank you. First thing, let me just congratulate Sammy and Miss Teresa. What they've been doing in sensitizing the public on this bill. This is, I think, the third show that I'm watching them doing this, and I think they're doing so very well. I have myself been following this quite a bit. I read, I think the last draft they had was in 2016. I read that quite a bit. It had some problems, which I pointed out to the AG and I sent him a draft. But the main point for me calling is to really to support and buttress some of the things that your guests have said. You see, there is a general problem. Let me begin with a general problem. There is a general problem in Cayman as to who is in control of the legislative process, who decides what goes in it, what processes exist to ensure that there is sufficient consultation in government, sufficient consultation outside the government with the stakeholders, and whether after that consultation, if it does take place, whether in fact ultimately it is taken into account in the legislation, or whether it is just like for show, and then ultimately the handlers of the government, the people who tell the government what to do, and we know who they are, broadly speaking, whether they are the ones who decide issues. Now, having been in government, and I was a government legislative council for 12 years, okay, in Cayman. I drafted elsewhere also for a long time, but in Cayman specifically for 12 years. I can tell you that the control of legislation is not in the hands of Caymanians. It's not even in the hands of the politicians. The politicians are told what to do. And just to demonstrate that, in a previous call I did mention before, that after a little while working in Cayman, 6-7 years, I said to my bosses then, I won't mention them, but I was in the AG's office. I said, look, you need to train your chief officers how to develop legislation and how to consult to ensure that they can control the content and they can ensure that whatever the public wants to feed into that system can be effective, it can come in and be processed and reach the right people. These are courses that are taught in other countries. In the UK, for example, you don't do legislation even as a public servant. Forget about a drafter. Even a civil servant, say an environmental expert, you can't do legislation until you're trained. I developed a little course that said this will help chief officers know how to do this. Do you know what happened? The chief officers supported it. I know that for a fact because my then Solicitor General, who was a chief officer, told me, yes, there was a big support that this should be approved so that you can teach it, because I developed it specifically for Cayman. Do you know who opposed it? The current Premier, Alden McLaughlin, and the current Attorney General, Samuel Belgin, they opposed it. They said this is not going to be done. As a result, it was never done. Talk to any chief officer who you trust. They will tell you that this is the truth. And then, at that time, because I was so fed up with the idea that I was trying to be helpful and I was being stifled, I decided to go to the Civil Service Appeals Commission. Ultimately, I went to court. When I went to court, you know what happened? The Attorney General engaged a lawyer, a QC from the UK, paid him $79,000. This is public information. I can give it to you. Wow. $79,000 to come to court and argue against me, to say that I should not be allowed to teach people how the legislative process works. Now, one little fact I should have mentioned is that when they refused to do it in government, a Caymanian approached me to say that I could teach it in their company privately. And then, since I didn't want to break the law or my terms and conditions of employment, I asked for permission from the government to teach it privately in a Caymanian-owned company, privately in my private hours, and they refused to give me that permission. And they spent money, that kind of money, to prevent me from doing that in a court of law. Now, why am I going into detail regarding this? It is because the people in government want to keep everybody ignorant. They want to ensure that when a bill such as this one comes up, the legal services bill, there is not enough knowledge for people to consult. There's not enough time for people to consult. It is rushed at a time like now where we are heading towards Christmas.
Exactly.
So that the handlers of government are the ones who are pushing this process. Now, let me tell you something. Nothing that I've said in general terms is new, in that, you see, your guests have indicated that, but they might not have some of the specific anecdotal information that I have. There is one piece of legislation, I won't mention it, which I was dealing with when I was working with government. Important piece of legislation. You know where it was drawn up? It was drawn up in a private law firm. Even me, the chief officer concerned, we're all going to this private law firm. We had, I think, a total of about 10 meetings going to a private law firm, and the head of that committee was somebody in the private sector. And it was very, very clear that we were not supposed to in any way oppose what that committee, which was mainly private sector people, was suggesting. Now, I'm not saying private sector people are not important. They have to be consulted. But the government has to be at the center of the process. And it has to be the one to say, we are elected to defend the people, and we want to make sure that even as we consult, we do not trade the people to you, and sell them out. But that doesn't happen in Cayman. You see, when I started writing legislation almost 40 years ago, I was told that you never have a meeting on legislation in a private premises. You never do that, because it gives the impression that you as government, you are not in control. But that happens in Cayman all the time. And you must understand also that the drafters, it's good that the Law Reform Commission in this particular case did point out certain things, but drafters face a lot of pressure when they are working in government, to just accept whatever it is being proposed. Let me give you one little more anecdote. I know that I'm taking a little bit of time. There's one time there was a piece of legislation, again I won't mention, which was being done by a colleague. This one was not being done by me. And I went to a meeting with the Attorney General, a certain famous practitioner, and a number of other people. And I couldn't believe what I saw there. This practitioner was asking the Attorney General, what is the need for this particular legislation? The Attorney General was supposed to explain to this person why that legislation was needed. And I couldn't believe it. Well, I mean, the Attorney General tried to explain. And let me tell you what. If you had been there, if I had a video of it, you would have said, yeah, here the boss is the guy from the private sector. The Attorney General knows that this guy is powerful. And to me, those are the things that take place behind the scenes, and they manifest themselves in bills like this, where you see, despite the fact that, for example, and Sami, you've been pointing out, and Mr. Riza, you've been pointing out, that there are certain things which were pointed out before. Why are they still coming back now? It is because people like that guy I'm talking about in that meeting are saying it's not going to happen. So there's just need for better accountability. Very two quick points finally. The Chief Justice should not be a member of the board. I doubt that the AG even should be a member, but I've got a greater objection about the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice has been the one on the other show. Sami, you were talking about how the Chief Justice, is a member of that board, and also talking about how does he deal with issues when they arise from the legal practitioners board. And then they try to deal with it by saying it goes to the Court of Appeal. And you've all pointed out that this is not satisfactory. The Court of Appeal is very, very expensive. But to me, I've got even a greater problem with the Chief Justice, because right now, he doesn't respond to people who complain about things to him. So why are they rewarding that office with this new office? I know people who have had their money stolen. They've complained to him. For years, he has never responded. I had a complaint with him about another lawyer who practically insulted me in a letter. I complained, and I was hoping the Chief Justice might just have a quiet word with any of us. Nothing ever happened. So I don't know why they keep rewarding that office with all these positions in there. And finally, I think you should keep pushing this issue about the local companies control law. You see, how does a government create Truman Bodin Law School? I think it was created about 32 years ago, thereabouts. But up to today, you hardly have a lawyer in the AG's chambers. And then on top of that, then you exempt law firms from the LCCL, which will make it more difficult for those locally produced lawyers to find a footing in the profession. How can a government which claims to serve the people continue insisting on that? This should apply to lawyers as well, so that in the end, practitioners, young practitioners who are coming out there, Caymanian practitioners can come out there and be able to find a footing in there. At the moment, it is pretty much a closed shop, and it is very, very difficult for local people really to get into these firms and be able to play a more significant role than they are doing now.
All right. Thanks very, very much for sharing that, Sammy. Teresa, if we could just quickly pause, take a break. We invite our other callers and comments. When we return, stay tuned for Talk Today.
Are you ready for the reggae show of the year? Bacardi presents One Love concert series, bringing to you Mr. Notch and Locomotion 345, Stuart Wilson, Erica Asai, and DJ Nico. It's going down Saturday, December 12th at Coral Beach. Tickets only $25. VIP inclusive drink $65. Cabana packages $200. Available now at eventpro.ky.
Brought to you by Bacardi, Burger Shack, Supermix, Rubis, and Radio Cayman.
It is the season of giving, and there is no better place to shop than Penha, Mac, and Victoria's Secret. Amazing savings on already low prices, and when you sign up for the Penha loyalty card, you get 3% back on all your purchases. And while you shop, enter raffles to win major prizes up to $5,000. Penha, Mac, and Victoria's Secret on 40 Cardinal Avenue in Georgetown.
Do you remember when 2020 was great?
I don't think it was
2020 vision, not the year.
right.
Make 2020 great again with Optical Outlook, the new West Bay store now open. With their designer frames and sunglasses, eye health has never looked so good. Call 746-2020 and book your eye exam today at Caymanian Village and now at Jake Scott Plaza in West Bay, offering premier eye care in Cayman for over 30 years. Come see the difference with Optical Outlook.
Attention Caymanians, the registration deadline for the 2021 elections is January 4th. Caymanians turning 18 on or before the May 26 election may register now.
Every vote will count in our May 2021 general election.
In order to vote in the 2021 elections, you must register by the 4th of January. For more information, visit elections.ky or the elections office at Baytown Office Suites opposite the Wharf Restaurant. The 19th Annual Talent Exposition of the Arts on Sunday, December 13th is proudly sponsored by Walker, NCB, Frank Hall Homes, Rainbow Real, Caymanian Times, Dr. Steve Tomlinson, Domino's Pizza, CUC, Macross, Automotive Arts, Fire Extinguishers Pro, A.L. Thompson, Burger King, Mitsubishi, Rubis Red Bay, Jose's Rubis, Rubis Eastern Avenue, Savannah Rubis, Brown's Esso, Mike's Esso, Dalworth's Esso, the Ministry of Culture, and the Ministry of Education. Get your tickets for the 2020 Talent Exposition of the Arts at eventpro.ky.
Talent Exposition of the Arts.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners' participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to our callers for listening and sharing their thoughts, but equally to our guests, Mr. Teresa Pitcairn and Sammy Jackson, for sharing with us. 949-8037, 1-800-534-8255. We do have another caller join us. Perhaps just go straight to the phones. Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for calling.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Hey, Mr. Sterling. Good afternoon to Mrs. Pitcairn and good afternoon to Mr. Jackson. This is Johan Moxham.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Johan.
You guys are burning up the airwaves and putting in a lot more work than the government, who have yet to explain any of this to us. But I thank you for your sterling efforts in trying to educate the masses. I just have two questions. Given the significance of this piece of legislation and the concerns that obviously exist, the previous legislation was pulled in 2017, and here we are in 2020 with the new bill. Has there been an opportunity for ALPA or a collection of individuals to sit and discuss and possibly share concerns, grievances, or possible amendments to the proposed legislation? One, has that happened with the Attorney General's office, the Premier and his cabinet or caucus, or any of the decision makers that are trying to have this legislation passed in the LA? Because no piece of legislation is ever perfect, but if they have the numbers, and the only thing that Caymanians ever seem to get upset about is same-sex marriages or civil partnerships, which is mind-blowing, because apparently you can be a senior member of the House, plead guilty to something, and nobody has any sort of issues on ethics or morality or how that appears. So I guess that's just one of those crazy things that makes Caymanians, or at least Caymanian leadership, that way. But I say all of that to say this: has there been a opportunity to sit down with members of the government and share the concerns, negotiate or share possible amendments so that a compromise and a bill that is worth the paper it's written on can be passed, so that we can
move
have
forward.
some sort of positive forward momentum, because this is the proverbial political football that gets kicked down the road every 3 or 4 years, it feels like. And I get it, because the sponsors of the government and politicians are some of very wealthy people who stand to benefit largely from having the legislation passed. So nobody's doing this because they're altruistic. Everybody's looking out for their own sort of interest, and political expediency is the modus operandi of the current administration. So it was a long question, but I think it's a fair question, and I'd be most grateful if you guys could help me understand, was there any sort of discussion? Why wasn't there a discussion? And why do we continue to put lipstick on a pig and call it a new pig? Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. To answer the question, Dwayne, we weren't given any real opportunity to have any meaningful input on this. Although we seized the opportunity, we've put, as I said before, in writing, right? And I can read that for the benefit of the public, and provide copies to anyone, including the cover letter we sent to government from last year, saying what these are our fundamental positions in regards to provisions that need to be in this law. We said that to the Premier, the Attorney General, and Minister Hugh when we met with them in October of last year, well over a year ago, that we wanted to be part of the discussion. We are concerned about Caymanian interests and the well-being of the people of Cayman. And quite frankly, after hearing what the previous caller said, that confirmed my fears. That also resonates with me, because I once upon a time worked at the legal department, but I never. It's difficult to hear that it has descended to the position it is in today, if we take that caller's words at face value, which I have no reason to doubt. In fact, what he has articulated resonates with me, because it confirms, it's corroborated by the overt actions we have seen on the part of the Attorney General. And as I said earlier, I find that very disappointing. No.
And again, on the score, we're friends. So this is not a personal, it's not personal. It's nothing to do with that. It's inviting all of us to focus on the issues, not about the personalities, but the issues.
Indeed, and we need to look at, the forget about the persons who occupy those constitutional positions, but those constitutional positions bring with them a constitutional duty, a consequent constitutional duty to perform in accordance with the Constitution. And I believe the Attorney General took an oath of office, and I quite frankly don't think he's living up to that. Why I say that, and the Premier as well. And I don't know who their handlers are. Well, I have a good idea. I have a good idea where this bill was originated. And the fact that the Premier is right down there at ALA now, well, apparently they just broke for lunch, but I was just informed that he was reading the bill, and there is no provisions in it for practitioners to have to take out a work permit fee. That's something that I want to cover today, because the fact that we have let them practice law, patently, flagrantly circumventing and skirting the provisions of the immigration law. We have allowed law firms here to hire people, right, and place them beyond the reach of the jurisdiction just so they could avoid work permit fees. And we haven't addressed that legislatively. We haven't plugged that hole. But worse yet, we're not only not asking for reparations for the economic damage that has done, because these folks have derived massive profits from that exercise. And they talk all about how the Cayman Islands have benefited from what they do over there. Well, you know what? Prove it. Show us the numbers. Show us the empirical data. Show us, in fact, government should show us an independent economic study establishing that this, as I said earlier, that this practice actually benefits the Cayman Islands to the extent that we can eschew laws and throw the immigration law out the window when it comes to law firms, of all things. The highest paid jobs in this country that derive the highest work permit fees, we're going to allow them to circumvent it, and now we're going to license it for a mere $2,000 more per year per attorney. Yeah, we're going to let them, and those folks are actually harder to regulate than we are, because we are on the ground in Cayman.
They're out of reach, out of sight.
Well, yeah, and so there's an extra layer of regulatory function because they are overseas. We have to find some way for them to report back, keep an eye on them. That is going to be a challenge, and challenges translate into cost. So that form of regulation is going to come at an enhanced cost. Do you think $2,000 more a year is going to cover that?
Jurisdictional risk as well.
That's insane. That's nowhere near an adequate premium for the risk.
So we're not getting the work permit fees, potential impacting the employment options for those here.
So we normally pay $2,000 a year to get our practitioner's license, and what they're recommending is $4,000 and avoid any kind of work permit for folks that come here.
Not only but the fee is just one aspect of it. Yeah. But the bigger part of the picture is, if you are going to allow entities who are in Cayman, who don't have to go through any form, this is what this bill provides for, any form of fitness and propriety test. All they need to do is show up and pay a fee, and they get a license to operate as a law firm. Okay?
No regulation.
No regulation at all. Not even like touch regulation. None. Then they can hire whoever they choose. All they need to do is put as many people on the ground in Cayman as they have overseas. But the ones overseas, they don't need to get permits for. How is it the government can't see something seriously wrong with that? How is it the people of this country aren't enraged to know that there's a special class of people in this country who can skirt our laws, who can force the government to forego revenues that we will desperately need, ever more so because of the COVID pandemic and the fallout that will come, because we haven't felt it yet, We're in the bottom drop out of that pension bucket, that generous offer, right? And we start to feel a pinch next year. I wonder if he understands that by May of next year, there are going to be some pretty ticked off people in this country, Yeah, but it occurs to me that he is a savvy politician. He's an experienced lawyer. If he doesn't get it, I can't even accept that he doesn't get it. So that begs the question: what is motivating him to serve this cause? He knows this failed last time because of all of these things. He pulled it himself because of this very same shortfall in the legislation. But yet he's down here ramming this down our throat at Christmas, giving us the shortest consultative period possible, trying to get it through. Austin told me yesterday they're going to rush it through, and the Premier's intention is to get it done today. Imagine that.
All right.
Right? Because we were on the radio yesterday, and they're obviously concerned because people are going to realize that this law does not bring all that they promised it would bring. And Dwayne, I am tired of being apologetic for trying to protect Cayman interests. That is not my job, That is the job of the Premier.
Yeah.
All we are here doing is pointing out that he is failing miserably in his duty to the people of this country.
All right.
He and the Attorney General, right? And honestly, if they work for a corporation instead of a company, they would have been fired long ago. Where you make decisions in private, you expend funds of the shareholders in this case being the people of the taxpayers of this country. You take their money, you spend it on your own projects, you undertake exercises to determine whether something is viable, and if it proves not viable, you hide the report and tell them it's privileged. All of that rubbish has gone on, unchallenged, largely. And here we are again being confronted with another legislative initiative trying to push this railroad, this same sort of legislation through that has failed before. And why? What is provoking him? What in God's name could provoke him to commit political suicide? Because that's what he's doing, And I say that and warn him and the members of his cabinet and the backbench. And I said as much to Austin yesterday. Yes, the opposition might have smaller numbers, but it's easy to make a case where you're on the right side of it. Right? When you're on the right side of an issue, it's an easy thing to win. Right? So I hope he recognizes the risk. And
but this is his last term as Premier, right? So.
Yeah, and while his handlers might be all happy with how he's performing, and maybe he'll get this through, because apparently he has a bunch of sheep instead of fellow members of his party or whatever that thing is that he created out of that unholy matrimony with McKeever. He can get this through, but no law is immutable. Come May, it might be reversed. This might very well be the thing that creates the groundswell that gets rid of this government. So I would advise him to proceed carefully.
Well, let's pause and take a break. We invite the phone and to light up. When we come back, let's take some calls.
Kirk Freeport's $40,000 Christmas sweepstakes is back. Spend $100 on your favorite Kirk Freeport store, and you could win one of 3 $5,000 cash prizes, or one of 5 $1,000 cash prizes. All purchases of $100 before noon on Christmas Eve qualify for all remaining prize draws. There will be the annual Rolex watch prize draw on January 4th, and loads of other great prizes. Our small boxes give big surprises, and a Christmas full of great prizes. Full details on KirkFreeport.com. Merry Christmas from everyone at Kirk Freeport.
Fidelity Bank would like to thank all essential workers. We salute your efforts and thank you for the sacrifices you've made to keep us all safe. During these challenging times we're facing, our top priority is the health and safety of the communities we serve. And while it's true that things are changing rapidly every day, one thing that will never change is our commitment to giving you the best and sound financial solutions to help you during and after the coronavirus pandemic. At Fidelity Bank, our focus will always be you. Fidelity, we're good for you.
Rotary. We've been part of the beginnings, the then and now of the Francis Bodden Girls' Home in Bodden Town and the Bonaventure Boys' Home in the West Bay. Rotary Central, along with community partners assisting students to overcome barriers on their path of learning during this pandemic. Thousands of dollars in laptops. Support for the annual Rotary Island-wide health check and diabetes training by Rotary. The National Blood Bank. Supported by Rotary since 1999. Lives saved, lives restored. Just a little of what we've done and continue to do. Rotary opens opportunities.
UCCI students, have you registered for classes in the spring 2021 semester? Class registration takes place until January 8th. Classes start January 11th. Spring into action. Visit ucci.edu.ky/myucci. Call 623-8224 or email admissions@ucci.edu.ky for more information.
The road to becoming a British Overseas Territories citizen just became a lot smoother You can now apply online at online.odg.gov.ky. If you or someone you know needs to be naturalized or registered as a British Overseas Territory citizen, or if you are a citizen and need to replace your lost or damaged certificate, complete the process at online.odg.gov.ky.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners' participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. Thanks for calling, and thanks to Mr. Teresa Pitcairn and Mr. Sammy Jackson for joining us, and to the callers for sharing. This issue, though, maybe I'll ask that in a second. With reference to you and to our callers, let's immediately go to our phones. Sure. Good afternoon, welcome. Thanks for calling.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Yes, good afternoon to your panelists, esteemed Teresa and Sammy. George Ebanks here.
Good afternoon.
I haven't been that involved in this discussion, because I thought it was kind of, the use of a better word, over my pay scale. But having listened to you guys from the outset of the show, I really want to get involved by calling in and saying that really I find it very odd that really, this thing should be quite equitable and favored to all parties equally. And it looks like I read to say that all along this process, which as you said earlier, it seems to come up every 4 years. Mm-hmm. All along this process, has there never been any room to sit down, like a sort of summit or a get-together, and sort of iron out all the rough points and get a good, equitable legal practitioner's law before the country, so that everybody who practices law feels protected and feels at home and feels comfortable with it?
To answer the question directly, there's been many opportunities. We have hammered out all sorts of legislation. I happen to know that my most favorite lawyer, Mr. Ian Paget Brown QC,
yes,
dug into his own pocket at one point, subsequent to the last debacle in 2017. And between 2017 and early 2018, he paid a former legislative draftsperson from Cayman, Ms. Myrtle Brandt, to draft a turnkey piece of legislation that encapsulated not only all of the important elements of the bill that Mr. Panton had sponsored, but layered into that the agreed positions, because this is the thing that the Premier and them are not telling anyone about either, right? He tried to deny it even to me. When during the last debate, right, the last go round with the Panton bill in early 2017, there was fierce negotiations going on between the opposition and the government, and they got stuck on one single point. You know what that was? Caymanian ownership of the law firms. You don't need to take my word for it. Speak to Arden McLean or Bernie Bush or Winston Connolly, or any of them that were involved, and that's what it got stuck on. But so Mr. Paget Brown took what were the agreed positions, right? Because we got back a list, and he paid someone to create a turnkey piece of legislation, and he circulated that to every single person in government and the Chief Justice, the Attorney General, etc. Everyone had it. I got a copy of it, and it just blew me away. As far as I can recall, he only got an acknowledgement from one or two parliamentarians. No one took that bill forward. It would have been this whole issue would have been moot. No, because we would have for once got the legislation, the meaningful regulation we need.
Right.
But you know what? The problem is the people who are behind the government promoting this bill, whether it comes from the Attorney General's chambers or not, I am past making excuses for him.
Right.
This bill, they simply want they want to secure the status quo. They want to license that which they have practiced for a long time, because they're too fearful that if we do otherwise, that has if you take a rearward looking perspective, has implications for them. Because someone is going to ask, well, if this is what obtains now, what about what they've done in the past? What are you going to do about that, Mr. Attorney General?
Yeah.
And he has turned a blind eye to this. I suspect some of what motivates him, if not most of what motivates him, is that this bill, by encapsulating the status quo, lets him off the hook. Because he's the chief legal officer of the government, and he is ultimately responsible for the prosecutorial services of the Cayman Islands. So I can only make the logical assumption based on what I've seen and what I know, and I've been involved in this in a long time, and I know him well too, that this is what is motivating this bill with these same very, very dangerous provisions in it. And I'm glad you got involved, George, because this doesn't affect, I keep saying this and people need to listen, this doesn't just affect lawyers or Caymanian lawyers in particular. It affects everyone. When you have a legislative initiative that gives up not only revenues that it should have collected in the past, but you secure a position for major corporations, right, to avoid paying government taxes, then you are setting the country up for failure.
But
it's as simple as that.
Sammy,
George,
just one second. Just to underscore what Sammy has also said, we now have leaders who are willing to sanction criminal behavior.
That's amazing.
You know, let's chew on that. I mean, but by passing legislation which they know will have this effect. Right. There were two other things too that hamstrung the previous legislation. They wanted to train and advance Caymanians, and they also wanted to buffer. The opposition also wanted to buffer against discrimination and so on. So those were two other issues that came up. Yeah.
Because it dawns on me that what you all have been saying, in essence, for these attorneys traveling working overseas, those firms are in essence an agency, and they must comply as all agencies do, including myself. You have to have a trade and business license, and under that you can apply for work permits.
And indeed, and they need to compete with Caymanians for those overseas jobs. Why is it everyone seems to forget that? Why is it that Caymanians aren't allowed overseas? I mean, if they can make a case to the work permit board, well, we need this particular fellow in our Hong Kong office because he speaks Mandarin, then you can make the case. But if you don't need that, right? And we know that there will be abuses anyhow, but at least set up a clear, transparent, balanced system where a process dictates the outcome, and you ensure thereby that there's at least some semblance of fairness, and that Caymanians' interests are put first. Why in God's name is the government acting against the interests of the people of the Cayman Islands?
Yeah, George.
Can I ask in closing? Can I ask this question, which is perhaps a rhetorical question, but you all can discuss it, and we can probably get more calls on it. But I just want to throw this out as a final question for me, because I've taken a lot of time, and thanks, Dwayne, for allowing me. But
of course,
the question is, can an imperfect bill, let's say this one passes, can an imperfect bill not be perfected over time? If this one is put into effect, then you have something to work with to find the flaws and try to correct the flaws, or the flaws are too many.
Well, look, we've said from the outset, they could redact the bill, they could take out the controversial provisions, pass the majority of it. The one thing that they need to take care of is structure the board so that we have actual properly structured regulatory authority. Otherwise, we may just throw it in the garbage can, because it brings nothing. You keep hearing this talk about we need this to advance the profession. Without this we are lost at sea. They haven't even really made any attempts to make any meaningful amendments to the existing law, including the fine.
If the bill is passed as is, does it have enough traction that it can be made a sort of campaign issue coming up that really we need to get new people in there to change it?
It does, George. But the truth is, if you open the floodgates, you're going to let so many people in, and you're going to establish a practice. It is always harder to close the gate after the horse is gone. You don't achieve anything with that.
Right.
And we know they're going to say, we have established rights, And out of that, we have a legitimate expectancy that we will be able to continue to do this because the government licensed it, and there we'll be stuck.
Come on, ring the bell.
So we are at the 11th hour.
Remember one other point that's in this particular legislation: Caymanians can't work overseas unless they're with one of these affiliates or one of these. That's how they limit our right to do what we want to do. Yeah.
So, George, thanks very much for that, and to our guests, respectfully. Let's pause, take a quick break. It is not just an emotive issue, but one that I think necessary for us to continue to discuss. So let's pause and take a break. When we return, we'll continue the discussion.
Today's biggest news.
Radio Cayman.
It's only 2 species that we have on the island.
Generations present.
Your voice, your choice.
It is in the best interest of the people of these islands.
Local, regional, international. This is Headlines from Radio Cayman's newsroom.
Today's biggest news.
With your latest headlines, I'm Felicia Rankin-Solins. Cayman Connection is set to host a virtual Christmas culture gathering event on Friday, December 18th to provide a piece of home for Caymanians overseas during this difficult time. The guest list is currently now over 65. Final RSVP and registration for the event closes on Thursday, December 10th at midnight. To register, email hello@caymanconnection.org. In international news, the granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Zara Tindall, is pregnant with her 3rd child, who would be the monarch's 9th great-grandchild. One of the planets that orbits around Proxima Centauri, the closest star to our Sun, had been thought to exist within what astronomers call the habitable zone, meaning not too hot and not too cold for some form of life to exist. However, new research has dampened hopes that any suggestion of life could exist on its surface, with the planet likely experiencing inhospitable space weather. A women's university football match in China had to be called off after players were told they were not allowed to have dyed hair, state media reports. Team members from both sides bought black hair dye to correct the problem, but one team's player's hair was deemed not black enough, and the side had to forfeit for only having 6 players. These are your headlines. I'm Felicia Rankin-Solins. For the latest in news and information,
follow Radio Cayman on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Download the Radio Cayman app or log on to our website, radiocayman.gov.ky.
your voice, your choice, your radio.
Miracle Brokers International, your worldwide movers and freight forwarders, continues to work hard to improve their expertise to provide you with the first-class service you have come to expect. Now, together with Consolidated Freight Line, CFL, the specialist in logistical and global cargo solutions, customers can rely on an expanded team of moving professionals that gets the job done in a timely manner. Whether it's your prized possessions, full container loads, less than container loads, ro-ro cargo, or construction equipment, from door to port services, or across the oceans, from destinations such as the US, Canada, Asia, the Caribbean, Central and South America, among others. Miracle Brokers and CFL Combined Networks offers hundreds of expert connections that take the stress out of moving and shipping services. Call today for your free estimate, 949-5989. You can also log on to www.miraclebrokers.com. Miracle Brokers is located at the end of Kingbird Road, just past CUC. Miracle Brokers, the art of packing and moving, 949-5989.
Your Radio Cayman 6 p.m. news, Monday through Friday, is brought to you by Logic, your life connected.
More than 100 studies on parent-child relationships have found that having a loving and nurturing father is just as important for a child's happiness, well-being, social, and academic success as having a loving and nurturing mother. Do not undervalue your significance as a father. Your children, this community, and the future needs you. Reach out to the Family Resource Center for parenting support at 949-0006 or frc@gov.ky. They are here to help.
Talk today. But I do have some questions. Talk today.
Cayman Islands' foremost listeners participation program.
Talk today.
Because there are more questions than answers.
What the public is saying.
Waiting to take your calls right now. Sterling Dwayne Ebanks.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for not just listening, but calling and giving us your input. Thanks equally to our guests. Today, we have the company of Sammy Jackson and Teresa Pitcairn for sharing with us. If I might, and I certainly want you to share with us so that we can learn more, be engaged. And I think as the last call in particular indicated, this is not just about lawyers or the legal profession. But if I can ask, maybe to understand a little bit better, if this particular issue is now before the Legislative Assembly, and let's say it passes, and given that the government seemingly has the majority, I mean, then what? Other than the repeal or the amendment in subsequent times, but as you shared, the floodgates open. But right now it's passed, we're going into Christmas. What can we do as a people, as a profession, as parliamentarians, as voters? What do we do?
Well, we can sit and watch the slow, insidious creep of economic contraction that will ensue. We're talking about the highest paid jobs in the country, That's, people seem to forget that. And we've been suffering economic damage. We've been bleeding for a long time on this. And if we are going to pass legislation now that all you have to do to get an operational license as a law firm, right, without any other strictures or requirements, is pay a fee. We will be and if we, in conjunction with that, allow foreign law firms to come here, set up shop, pay a fee, and license an equal number of people overseas to practice law, right? And for all we know, they may have twice as many people overseas. How are we going to regulate that properly without any meaningful provisions in this bill that allows the regulator to, and especially if the bill in its current form gets passed exactly the way it's written, and you have the board, that strange construct, handing off the reins to a conflicted entity such as SILPA or CARA. And there's no regulation at all for the firms that own and handle those two entities. And and this is not, speculative comment, You only need to look at who is running CARA. Okay. A former partner of Maples and Calder left his high-paying job as a partner, making millions of dollars a year, to bring a few of his friends in from England to set up CARA. That's a fact. That's something he said publicly before its advent. He was meeting with members of the profession in a drive to get everybody to join SILPA, because that is what they contemplated. And when that didn't happen, the government tried to pass legislation, you might recall, late last year, to force all of us who said we don't want to be a part of SILPA. SILPA is a privately owned company, owned and run by the big law firms. We are not going to be subject to their control. We don't want to associate ourselves with them. We have a constitutional right to choose who not to associate with. And despite that, the government, one of the reasons we met with the government was to complain about that, The government promulgated a bill, or they tabled a bill to force us to be deemed members of SILPA so that we could be subject to the control of SILPA's, the bifurcated subcommittee, CARA. And then we would be subject to control effectively by the big firms and that is actually the genesis of ALPA, That is what, when we saw that coming, a number of us assembled in the town hall and we said, we can't take this. Some of us did, some of the numbers they dwindled away. They didn't really want to take on SILPA. Some went and joined SILPA. Some have subsequently resigned. We even have ALPA members that have subsequently resigned from SILPA, right? Because they saw what SILPA was all about. And if we are going to set this law up so that we have the foxes watching the hen house, so to speak, we have people regulating themselves under this imaginative construct of a board that doesn't actually do anything because it has already handed off the reins to someone else. And law firms can come here and set up. All they need to have is one partner, who is Caymanian. They pay a fee, and that's it. And then they can have half of their workforce, or their official workforce, working overseas. Can you imagine how Cayman would be inundated with law firms? One of the concerns that we have advanced is that we are concerned about the prevalence of new law firms coming to Cayman to set up shop here, right? That have no nexus to the country whatsoever, and some of them channeling work back to people who are not even holding themselves out as Cayman lawyers, have never had a certificate of practicing certificate, have never been to the country, as far as we know. And if we are going to allow that, you can forget about the future of law practice for any Caymanian.
Right. Let's pick up
that is just one of the effects, and then there's the economic impact. Right. So
let's go to the phones and grab the caller. Teresa Pitcairn and Sammy Jackson are our guests. Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for calling.
Good afternoon to you, Sterling Green.
Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. Thanks.
Good afternoon to Mr. Sammy Jackson. I should have said Mr. Issa first.
Yes, sir.
Wonderful young Caymanians, well educated. It's hard to evoke empathy or sympathy, whichever sort of nomenclature you choose to use, from the general public for what Mr. Sammy just said, and he said it before and others, the highest paid people in Cayman from the general public. But, of course, we understand your position. Unlike Mr. George, who has accounting degree, I have no degree in anything. But I'm unafraid to talk to even a professor. Because I remember what my mother said. I've never forgotten it. It was many years ago. The biggest fool is an educated fool. Because if you have a lot of education, then you can be the biggest fool. It's simple. Now, I just asked two questions first, and then I'll just say something briefly. Do the people who are practicing these laws, Cayman laws, in these other countries, are they paying income tax to those countries from their salary that they earn?
We have no way of knowing that.
Oh, because I know all countries except us have an income tax system, direct income tax. But the other thing is this, the yes or no answer. Bermuda is in the same sort of business that we are in. You can call it that simply. As a crown colony or crown territory like ourselves, do they have this problem that you're talking about?
No, they do not.
No, they do not. Okay. Now, we, as you said before, it's a lot of money the government is losing by not getting the work permit fees, and we understand that. But we have one thing here that's unique to us, one situation. We don't have any direct income tax. I've always maintained that if we had direct income tax, we would have the proper controls over these high-paying, high-earning people. Because they would have to give to the government every year some return and say this is what, and you're not going to do it like with a work permit fee where you're paying a bartender's work permit and you're managing a hotel. I've seen that happen. It's not going to happen that way because they go around and look at your lifestyle, how you live and what you're doing, and then you're even faced with worse. That's how they operate in other countries, the tax system. So you must fess up and you must pay. And they would, those over there, you say, not paying the work permits to the fee to the government, but should be paying, well, they would have to pay income tax to Cayman, or they couldn't practice. Or these over here, who they're practicing for, the company, would be liable for that tax, and therefore they would have to pay. The old saying, your donkey, which I don't want to use a word that might not be proper for the radio, would eat grass. And it's so simple that it escapes a big fool like me why we don't do this, implement this, and we stop sending away the millions and millions of dollars on this pension scheme that was devised, I'm sure, and had the input of lawyers to make that into a law, mandatory, which is really only a mandatory savings scheme. We saw what happened in this crisis with COVID. We had to bring hundreds of millions of dollars back as what would have been in any other country an unemployment compensation tax. We don't pay any, so we see the consequences of it, and instead we introduce and make these silly laws. And I'm not blaming any government, anything for it. Blame everyone for allowing this to happen and accepting it over the years, when knowing, like one or two other fools like myself said from the beginning 22 years ago, that it wouldn't work. Just implement simply direct income tax, and we'd solve the problem with a law business, because trust me, if it's properly run, a tax department, you would have some serious people in there to enforce it. Believe me, it can be done. It can be done.
If it's done properly.
Big staff. Thank you, sir. It can be done.
Yep.
It can be done. If she enforce garbage fees and enforce other things, of course, has to be. It can be done. Just the courage. Thank you all very much. I think that's the solution to the problem, and many of our problems. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, sir. Have a wonderful afternoon as well. Now, Sammy, Mr. Iso?
My views on it, the last thing the Cayman Islands would need to propose is a direct income tax, in my humble opinion, simply because even the mention of that would drive a lot of business away from Cayman, given that we already have exorbitant consumption taxation, direct consumption taxation, which I honestly say is the better model. One of the secrets of success of Cayman, I believe, is the fact that we tax based on consumption. And we have established, we don't call it tax, we don't want to use the T word, we call it duty and all that sort of stuff, and fees. But I believe we could create a sufficient revenues from that form of taxation if we actually managed it properly. And that is part of the problem. And what we're seeing right here is government foregoing a massive shortfall in revenue from work permit fees. Every other type of business that wants to do business in Cayman has to go through the competitive work permit process, has to file a business and staffing plan. But these firms, right, most of whom are foreign owned, the majority of the equity in a lot of these firms is foreign owned. They don't have to pay go through that competitive process or pay a work permit fee. At the very least, forget about the fact that the folks aren't here on the ground, that you get the economic trickle-down effect, because there's benefit in that. I've always said that that the placing too many people overseas is an existential threat to the economy of the Cayman Islands, because the other thing the legal profession is a leader for others. If this is permitted in the legal profession, right, there are going to be other industries where work can be generated and transmitted electronically, where they're going to say, well, if the law firms can do it, we should do it too.
Yeah. We saw that.
What about the knock-on effect of that?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the economic destruction comes from the fact that there are less people who actually belong and want to stay in the country earning a decent income. Are we willing to forego that to preserve our almighty financial services industry? And I say that in recognizing that recognizing the importance of the financial services industry. I am the last person that would say that these folks should be taxed, that they should, in terms of direct income tax, etc. But one thing is for sure, there should be a level playing field. They should have to pay the fees that every other business have to pay. They should have to go through the established, legally prescribed work permit process. and business staffing plan, and if you're going to exempt half of their labour force, right, from that, bearing in mind some of these law firms now employ hundreds of lawyers. There's over 900 registered lawyers. Collectively, the owners and handlers of SILPA, and apparently the government, have some 800 or so lawyers in their employ. The rest are, small-time legal practitioners like me, who apparently the government doesn't care about.
And you're all here on the ground.
Yeah, we're here on the ground, paying taxes, paying that consumption-based taxation, dealing with the cost of living. And I want to say this, when I said, for the benefit of the last caller, when I said these are the highest paid jobs, the highest paid jobs in this country, lawyers don't make all the same money. Eh? The ones in those big firms, they make millions a year. The partners make millions a year. The junior partners and associates make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. But those of us out there struggling to make ends meet, we don't make that kind of money. Right, and we're the ones who give access to justice to the public of this country. We're the ones who give domestic advice. We're the least likely to get paid, right? And those are all the struggles of a small practice. I can tell you that.
But there are three things that, as you shared, that jump immediately to mind. And the last point being, those of us who may need a lawyer, we want to buy a piece of land. Maybe we're starting to think of, I say it this way: as hard as it is to talk about preparing a will, we realize at some point it's probably a smart thing to do. So we need to come to an attorney to do a will. I know that's a taboo subject, one that I would encourage us to do, just a personal aside. I still need to do mine too, right? Or do it again. But buying land, maybe we have some other dispute, maybe it's employment. We're going to go to the locally based attorney. So if there's not many of them available, that could affect justice and access to justice, right? But let's take two other things, if I may ask. When I listened to what you were sharing, the notion that architects in particular, years past, were complaining that a lot of the drafting, the architecture services, maybe it's still happening, maybe it's been resolved, I don't know, was being
it's not.
Okay.
I can tell you that from.
Okay. So they were saying, stuff were being done overseas, somebody here would take it into planning forum and get a fee. The same sort of thing could potentially be, happening here with the legal profession. But then the third thing, again, maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, maybe I'm drawing an improper inference, but remember, in the financial services sector, it was being shared that potentially concern the nameplate businesses that existed, and so we need to bring them back here and have a physical presence and the like for all of these other things.
Economic substance.
Right.
All those initiatives that have come to the fore recently.
Right. So if that was important for that aspect of the financial services sector, isn't that the same thing with lawyers not being physical on the ground and they can be absent? Or is it two completely separate and distinct things? I mean, if you needed to have businesses like that here, more than just a nameplate.
I believe they've taken that into account. They set up their offices here. They have, in order to derive all of the benefits that doing business in the Cayman Islands brings to them.
Right.
Because of the lack of income tax. So I understand the logic behind what the last caller said.
Right.
If you tax them, then it'll be fair. But the truth is, they'll find somewhere else to fly off to.
Right.
And I don't know that every other country in the world would impose direct income tax on them. We even have carve-outs in Ireland for certain types of businesses. Right. They've done that. These countries that are feeling the pinch, and especially now that they will start to feel the pinch even more, are going to become very creative, and we're going to have competition. And I recognize that. And I am all for the financial services industry doing what it needs to do to shore up and make sure that we are able to compete. But for God's sake, don't tell us that in order to do that, you need all of these folks licensed automatically, rubber stamped, and they forego the work permit process, because the short-term benefit might be there in that, the fear of them pulling up and moving away. But in the long run, it's simply going to translate into economic doom for us.
Well, as I listen to you, this is almost a lot like a person being allowed to drive a car. Don't have to buy gas, don't need to get it serviced, don't need to pay a license and insurance, don't need to even pay to get it washed. You just pick the car up and you go, and when you finish it, if you're not required to do much to enjoy what the Cayman infrastructure offers, and you can be positioned elsewhere because it's a bigger place. You got the operas and you got all these other things that you believe, life makes life better, and you can benefit from Cayman. It's not kind of taking advantage of the jurisdiction and its people and making us pay for more of it infrastructure to support your lifestyle, but you don't have to have anything vested here. Am I being a little bit stretching that a little too much, or is that very much similar?
Well, certainly they are deriving advantages from being here, and they're not paying a proportionate amount of fees for. That's the unfairness of it. And these not only when I say these are the highest paid jobs, I'm talking in particular about the partners. Yeah. The partners derive massive profits from the law firms. That's why they can pay a several $100,000 per annum operational fee, because they're making tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars.
All right, so as we wrap up our discussion, respectfully, let me bring it back. We know that the legislators are now there seemingly having this discussion. We gather from the timing and from what you share now that it seems, as you said, Mr. Harris indicated, the government would like this thing to be done and dusted today. If from what you've shared today only, but in the past, if this can be so obvious that it's not in the best interest of the country in terms of the regulation, the reputational, potential reputation damage.
It would be remiss of me, sorry, before I forget, because I didn't finish telling you the whole Austin Harris story. At the end of the 2-hour-long meeting I had with Austin yesterday, after I took him through what we were proposing in terms of amendments and the ideas or the ideology behind those things, I asked him a series of questions. I said, do you find anything that I have proposed irrational? He said, no. Do you find anything I've said outrageous? No. Do you find anything that I've said to be other than in the spirit of the best interests of Cayman? No. And I asked us a further 2 or 3 questions in that regard. And he was, no. And then he ended by saying, well, you should submit this to the government and we will take it on board. No, the truth is, I didn't really trust that. I would, at first it sounded appealing. And I said, yes, I personally don't have a problem with sharing anything. But the truth of the matter is, the simple truth, and I need to say this publicly, is that we have already shared not only our proposed amendments with the opposition, but we have given to the leader of opposition a letter explaining the rationale behind them in very gruesome detail. And I simply want to say that the reason we have done that instead of going to the government is that we have every reason to trust the opposition and not one single reason to trust the government based on what has transpired in the last 2 years.
Alone, yeah.
Just alone. Forgetting even about the distant past where the same players took the same stance they're taking now and it ended in a debacle. So I wanted to get that out there because, as I promised on the radio yesterday on a different talk show, I ain't having any backdoor secret meetings with any government official. Anything that I do or say about this bill or anything else for that matter is fair game when I come on the air, because I don't owe anybody anything. I don't have any hidden agendas. I have lost countless of hours of my time on this, and I'm not going to be cowed into, trying to get the government to do what the government already knows it should do. That makes no sense to me.
Do the right thing, huh?
They know what the right thing is. I'm convinced of that. We've represented that to them 100 times now in many ways, and it's come from many sources, and they simply don't seem to be interested. And if that is what they're going to do, then they should proceed at their own peril. But at the peril of the Cayman Islands, and I wanted to say this as well, I see we are at the 11th minute or the 11th hour, right? It's now or never. For those practitioners out there who are not concerned about this, you ought to be. You better get that legislation, read it and try to understand it. Ascertain for yourself that which I have ascertained and all the members of ALP have ascertained, and make sure, right, that you speak up very, very quickly to your representatives and tell them what you think about it honestly. Don't take my word for it. You're lawyers, you can read law. And if you're happy with that, then I don't know what to say. If you think that that isn't a threat to your future, I can't help you. And you mightn't be able to speak publicly because you work for one of these law firms that are the sponsors of this bill, but you should be speaking quietly to your own representative about how you feel in earnest about this bill and what it brings for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because let me tell you, if we create the platform for licensing overseas practitioners, you can forget about the future of the Caymanians in those big firms.
Wow.
That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, well, thank you both. And if in the interest of public edification, the invitation stands to you and others to come on and share with us. And we'll watch closely what is transpiring within the Legislative Assembly. Sorry, the House of Parliament.
Yes.
I'll get used to it at some point.
The House of Acts. Or actors.
We have the Book of Acts as well. But anyway, Ms. Teresa, thank you, Mom. And thank
Pleasure.
you, Mr. Jackson. I look forward to engaging you further. And to our listeners, if you're going to have a healthy democracy, we need to be very much engaged and informed. And Talk Today endeavors to always provide that opportunity to facilitate such discourse. Tomorrow is what? Thursday, Miss Susan? Whoa, what do you say? Well, the good thing about tomorrow is Thursday. The bad thing about tomorrow is Thursday. Well, listen, would you allow me to take a couple of days off? Tomorrow is an important day for me, and I'll be off tomorrow and Friday. And enjoying what is planned. My tongue tasteth the good sweet smell of thy. Let me go find out what's going on after tomorrow. Until then, be blessed.